Now it's time to talk about how to connect with community. Corporate Innovation in a Changing World panel is starting with moderation of Arçelik Chief Strategy and Digital Officer Utku Barış Pazar. And please welcome our participants, Bengi Korkmaz from McKinsey Turkey, Enis Hulli from 500 Startups Istanbul, and Hussein Kanji from Hoxton Ventures.
Hello, everyone. What a nice start. I'm amazed and energized by the video and everyone's thoughts about innovation. Well, innovation is a buzzword, innovation is a dream, innovation is a challenge. It's something that we all want. We all want to be innovative, we all want to create something new. It's like looking for the gold in the old times, but it's very hard to achieve at the same time. It's almost full of cries and lots of failures, and there are one out of maybe 10 succeed in that journey. Just to give you some numbers, innovation is even more important for the existing company because we always talk about innovation as something new, some new products, some new business models, and so on. But we also need to remember that there are a lot of incumbent companies and firms that are also in this journey, but most of them are not successful. If you look at some really hard numbers like the S&P 500 and how many, this is a very frequently used number, but since 2000, since year 2000, 52% of the Fortune 500 companies cease to exist. And looks like by 2027, 75% will no longer be there. So given that, innovation is even more important for the existing companies, just like the entrepreneurs. But innovation for the existing companies, it's even harder maybe. We all know Harvard professor Mike Tushman's ambidextrous organization word, which means organization needs to both keep on doing what they do well, but they also keep on innovating, which they call explore. So today it's all about exploring and how to do it right. And we believe that the answer is open innovation. But even open innovation is difficult. Embracing the collaboration with startups, external ideas is very challenging. But today I have three very experienced experts who are really vested in this area, and hopefully with them we will try to shed some light on what are some of the best practices and how can companies get better at open innovation. So welcome Bengi, welcome Enis, and welcome Hussein. I look forward to your thoughts and ideas, and I'll start with Bengi. Bengi is a partner at McKinsey, and most of you might know McKinsey is a consulting company, but over the last couple of years, McKinsey has been invested heavily in digital new business models. They've been collaborating with more than 500 such startups and acquired even close to maybe 20 of them. So, Bengi, what is changing in the world and why is open innovation even more important today?
Thank you so much, Utku. First, it's great to be here, and it's amazing that you're organizing this event. So, as you said, the S&P statistic is really something to reflect on, right? So, and I want to bring some facts from a survey that we have done with roughly 1,000 executives around new business building. And what they're saying is that by 2026, half of the company revenues will come from products or services that does not exist today. So most companies realize that the products and services they have today, they don't meet the needs of the consumers. So all the incumbents, who control a lot of resources today, I think they realize that they need to reinvent themselves in a much faster scale going forward. And this is where I think the importance of innovation comes. And this innovation, of course, could come from M&A. It can come from corporate ventures, could come from new business building. So it will come from many places. That's why the word in openness is important. It can come from anywhere. And this is hard for companies to realize because companies always think that they know the best, including our company. Like every company in the world, we claim that we know everything, which we clearly don't. So I think to adjust in the new world, obviously this the new business building and new ideas is super important. And also, like, the importance of sustainability. 9 out of 10 companies say that they will be working on creating sustainable products and services. So I do think there is a lot of momentum at the moment in the world. Many executives realize that this is a priority. At the same time, we also know that there's a lag between companies realizing that a trend has arrived and get into action. So this is why I think companies like you are investing in open innovation, and all of us, we're trying to kind of minimize that gap so that we continue to learn, and we invest, and we we scan the external environment to be able to serve our purpose.
Thank you, Bengi. It's very clear. I really like this, and I noted down 50% of the revenues will come from products and services that don't exist today, which is tying tightly into the S&P numbers. So future is unknown, and open innovation is important, but we also know that it's not working as much as it should. And you mentioned about not invented here syndrome. But there are also different dynamics at play. So Hussein, I mean, welcome again. And I just, before asking the question, I would like to introduce Huxton to our audience here. Huxton is an amazing venture capital firm based out of UK. You guys have 4 unicorns under your belt already, and you have invested in more than dozens of those similar companies. And from your website, I'm going to quote it: 44 billion value created. That's amazing. I mean, when you think of the value, 44 billion, that's a huge number. So you must be working a lot with these startups and their relationship with the existing companies. So from your perspective, Hussein, what works and what doesn't in this open innovation journey?
Yeah, I mean, so we're pretty happy that we've been pretty good early stage investors, and I think the one thing you didn't say is, we write the check at the very beginning. So when these companies are tiny companies and they're fledgling businesses, and then we watch them grow up, and we're only just getting started, and delighted to have you guys as investors as part of our journey as well. So we've seen a lot. I think what we have generally seen in the market is, the market is stacked very much against the innovators. It is difficult to build a big new company and innovate, and it usually tends to happen in greenfield opportunities where the company itself is doing something brand new and there isn't an incumbent market. I think if you're trying to build a product or service that has to go head to head against someone else who's already in the market, it's very challenging to be able to get market share. Small companies, the kinds of which we invest into, are not very well equipped. They don't have a balance sheet. They don't have supplier power. They don't have relationships in the industry. The deck is very much stacked against them. And if they have to go against someone who already has any of those things, they generally tend to lose. So we focus mostly on greenfield opportunities where the entire product or service that they're building is brand new, and that allows the company to kind of grow into the market kind of almost unencumbered, because if the product or service is brand new, there's no one else usually playing in the field. Corporates generally don't tend to think this way. It's very hard to go to your boss inside of an organization and say, I want to bet the future on this brand new thing, and the market size today is zero. But I'm going to bet my career, and I'm going to bet the company's future on this. It's kind of one of the reasons why we have the innovator's dilemma that Clayton Christensen has written about. But it is something that a startup and a venture-backed company can do quite well. And if they scale, it's usually the corporate that kind of wakes up a little bit later in the game to figure out, can they actually, should they be in the market? And by then it's sometimes too late, because if the company has accelerated rapidly, it might turn into its own independent company. And that's one of the reasons why you kind of see M&As. So, that's at a high level. I think if you're doing something innovative, you have to stick your neck out there a little bit and really focus on these new markets, new product categories versus just incremental innovation. I think incremental innovation versus like fundamental innovation are two very different things, and we only play in the new innovation space.
So when it comes to making sure that the corporations are able to work with the startups, there are, as you mentioned, there are some intrinsic differences in how they make decisions or what type of tool sets they have. So, in your experience, what are some good examples on how to make this relationship work?
Yeah, and so I think if you're a corporate, a lot of what you're doing is planning. And so one of the things that I always say is, startups are very inefficient organizations. They're only focused on the one thing that will grow them up, and they tend to run their companies pretty poorly. In fact, it's very, very, very hard as a young company to try and do 10 things right. You can only really do one thing right, 9 things are broken. Inside of a bigger company, that's inexcusable, right? You should be able to do all 10 things right. And so you end up with a lot of forecasting and planning inside the organization. Now, unfortunately for a startup, these two things don't always work very well together. And if a corporate is trying to engage with the startup community, they tend to usually plan. Budgetary cycles are a really good example of this. Most people do their budget, in the year prior to the next year. A startup doesn't have the ability to wait around for the following year for the company to actually create a budget and create a collaboration project with the company, because startups are usually funded only for about 12 months, maybe at a max 18 months. So by the time the budget comes around and the engagement actually starts, the company runs out of cash and goes out of business and doesn't have anything to show for it. So time is super important in figuring out kind of startup time, which is 12 to 18 months of life, with a company which tends to plan out usually 3-year, 5-year, 10-year roadmaps. These two things sometimes are orthogonal. And one of the reasons why brand new markets and big new markets actually really make a difference is because if the big new market actually takes off, then the corporate actually feels very much behind the wheel and almost has to break its own rules and break its own planning to kind of become a participant. And those kinds of collaborations work amazingly well, right? When there's such an urgency on the corporate side that they're willing to break the rules, not do the full set of planning, and actually engage with the startup. But finding that liaison between these two things is quite challenging sometimes.
Hussein, thank you very much. Really good insight. I'm just taking some notes about you're almost talking about two different worlds, and you mentioned about the differences of these worlds in terms of, money, time, some critical domain factors. So I'd like to move on and ask a similar question to Enis. Enis, again, welcome. Enis is representing 500 startups, a global venture capital firm, and Enis is in their Istanbul office. Enes, I just looked at the latest numbers. You guys have $22.7 billion under assets, made 2,600 investments so far globally, which is a huge number. And I'm pretty sure you have had the opportunity to observe the relationships of these startups with companies like Arçelik and many others. So what are your key takeaways, some of the hurdles and your recommendations on how to overcome them?
First of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. As 500 Global, we also have a lot of corporates who have invested into our funds, including yourselves, actually. And even from Turkey, we had 15 corporates who have invested into our fund, looking to boost their startup engagement. And this happens on different levels. And as we start with startup engagement, to understand where the corporate is on a spectrum, I think the two things are a must. There are two strict rules where there has to be a dedicated team, and there has to be someone who's directly reporting either to the CEO or to the board. So the startup engagement things under a corporate umbrella shouldn't be under a business development initiative or a CTO. It should be directly tied to the CEO. But even when those two things are right, the culture element is what people often get wrong, because even when the leadership team is committed and leadership team sets a different dedicated team, a dedicated budget to boost the startup engagement efforts, corporates like to take things slow. As similar to what Hussein said, corporates are a bit more risk averse. They're not as move fast, break things, and then fix along the way. And this creates a big dilemma as you're trying to engage with a startup. So I think the details are more ingrained into the cultural differences between a startup and a corporate. While a startup wants to move fast, be agile, do short-term planning. If it's wrong, you can iterate again. A corporate likes to take things slow, do long-term planning, which is also what Hussein said. And then this interaction between a startup and a corporate can be diminishing. It can provide negative value and negative returns for both sides if you cannot equate the cultural elements between the two entities, which often becomes the biggest hurdle, which is where we try to step in, where we try to push for the mindset of more rapid iteration, failing fast on the corporate side so that they can boost open innovation initiatives between the two sides.
It is. Thank you very much. I think these cultural differences are very, very important, and even the awareness about these cultural differences makes us go a long way, because we always assume that the companies that we interact with are in our own frame of reference in terms of money, in terms of time, in terms of processes and decision making. But you rightfully say, just also Hussein, they're on a different time zone, time domain, let's say, and we need to understand. And I really like this liaison idea, where coordinating all these efforts and making sure that we internalize this culturally is a good way forward. So now I'll continue with Bengi. Bengi, you've worked in McKinsey not only in Turkey but also in Europe, United States, I believe also in Korea. So you've seen the entire McKinsey and global innovation ecosystems as well. So what are your, some key learnings from McKinsey's journey in this digital business building and other startup collaborations?
Thanks, Utku. I would say like the whole collaboration and like open, let's say, alliances and partnerships is really important to us, because we are we're living in a world like where our clients want the best, and in today's world, like the knowledge and the expertise also lies in like very specific people and geographies. So we see ourselves as a catalyst to also like understand some of these capabilities around the world, and then bringing them to our clients. So this is an important role that we are aspiring to play, or we're trying to play. um, as you have mentioned, we have more than like 500 ecosystem members. These are people, institutions like Microsoft, SAP, and companies that we work like really closely with. And then we have also acquired like more than 20 companies over the last 5 6 years. um, I think the learning is that, so we work on a project basis, and sometimes business buildings can take more than like 5 years, 4 or 5 years. And as part of that, we bring the startups into these engagements, and that creates a very, I would say, low risk way of seeing how the chemistry works. We typically, like, once we identify a potential partner, we scope a project, and then of course that process needs to be kind of run by the risk and all of that. But then afterwards we see how it works in one geography or in a one client's situation, and then we try to kind of think about like how we can scale it up. And we have a central team, a leading team based in London, but they also have liaisons in different parts of the world. And I think starting small and really like testing and then creating a success case and then scaling up has definitely worked for us. And in terms of acquisitions and some of the interesting stuff, I would say like one example is Disney Institute. This is a partnership we have with them. We they are really good in customer experience. For instance, lots of clients want to see like how they manage customer experience. So we have brought them in like a few engagements and kind of helped, especially in the public sector, how we create better customer experiences. Another example is Vivid Economics. This is a company that we have acquired. They operate in the world of sustainability. They do sustainability economics and modeling. And then another example is Averkin, which is in a completely different space, which is like coaching and leadership development. And, initially we started to kind of bring them to our engagements, but then we realized how important this leadership development space is. So we actually acquired them and integrated them to our system. And now like we have, we've been kind of running our programs with them. So it comes in a lot of flavors, but I do think that it is about taking the first step and then bringing, getting people excited about it, and then like with the ambition of scaling the collaboration up.
Thank you, Bengi. Really appreciate. These are very vivid examples, and as actually we've been discussing with you on some of these projects, and I like how you framed it in terms of taking the small steps first and then going big. I think that's the way, because sometimes that big step is hard to achieve, and you just need to show. I call them the breadcrumbs. It's like you need to lead through that journey, so that gives small pieces of success. But now I'd like to uh, explore a little bit
I
on
think the
this.
most the most important thing is courage, what you said. And to bring courage, you need to bring excitement. So, and the excitement typically comes with a story, with a, with a case example, with an exciting client story. So that when that excitement surpasses the, the fear and the, and the motivation to not to do anything, then I think you can get people moving.
I'm a firm believer of that. We've seen, I think, as Arçelik, the very vivid example about our collaboration with Beyonce during the pandemic times. We had never actually collaborated with a startup at that scale in a crunch time frame, where actually we kind of like squeeze the time frame of any such projects by a magnitude of 10 times or so. We were able to turn this around relatively in like a month or so, which is, which would normally take about a month, about a year or so. So I really like this awareness, courage, and also inhibitors of the non-invented here syndrome. Let me put it that way. So all of them coming together and create a motivation to change, I think, is very vital. Thank you for the example, Bengi. I'd like to continue with Hussein on this time. Hussein, you've been mentioning this, and I wanted to pick up on that. So, what what are some examples of these time differences, and how can we manage that?
Yeah, so the big difference is I said, a startup's life is unfortunately always very perilous, and they don't get a refresher on life until they get their new round of financing, and these financing rounds tend to be every year and a half. So, a startup is trying to do as much as it possibly can to stack the odds so it can go get another round of financing, which means getting contracts, getting engagements, getting partnerships, showing real traction and momentum before it runs out of money, only to go off and do the entire thing again every 12 to 18 months. And it's only when a company gets much bigger that it actually gets stability and can start thinking much more about the future. Corporates don't have any of these issues, and most people are usually planning cycles are much longer. Uh, where I think things actually usually align really well is when there is a brand new market and a big new thing, and a corporate is missing exposure into that market, they will go off and break a whole bunch of rules, right? If you need a particular piece of technology in order to get something into the market and you never forecasted it, you didn't even realize that it was important technology, and the startup has the technology, the managers and the executives of that division will actually go break the rules instead of doing the planning, because it becomes almost a crisis. There's an urgency, and urgency usually means you don't actually follow all the rules. So that's usually the easiest way to collaborate. And we always say in our industry, you have to be in the business of selling painkillers, not selling vitamins. Because when you're in pain, you're in crisis, you will go off and break the rules, right? If you're selling a vitamin, it's a nice to have, and you go right into the normal planning cycle. The other way of fixing these things is sometimes, and this helps, and it's very hard to do because it requires a lot of dedication on the company side, is if someone who's an executive is willingly sponsoring engagements with companies. So it's not the line manager or the manager's job. It's not their neck on the line, because the worry in most companies is if something goes wrong and I'm working with this startup and I go ahead and I break all these rules and it's not an emergency, then the natural thing is I get fired or I get demoted or I don't get my promotion. And you really need to get past a lot of that inertia. And the only way that can happen is if you have executive sponsorship. You tend to find this a lot in the corporates who actually do investing. So corporates who set up venture funds or venture programs to actually go invest into companies and leave them alone as independent companies or independent organizations do fine. Companies that do that but don't leave them alone, but have the executive team kind of figure this stuff out. The worst I've ever heard is actually not a corporate. It was the country of Malaysia had a sovereign wealth fund that was investing into startups, and the startups would queue up every finalized company that they're ready to. Sorry, the fund would queue up the finalized list of investments up to the prime minister. So the prime minister obviously is not going to spend every week looking at every single one of these companies. These are scheduled every 6 months in advance. And then there was a regime change in Malaysia. The prime minister left, and there was a new prime minister, and a company that was counting on the Malaysian sovereign wealth fund to write the check the check never materialized because the country had bigger issues as they were going through a leadership change. That's a very pronounced version. It's not a corporate version, it's a state version. But you can imagine that level of planning. The only way to get past that is if someone who's very senior says, you know what, send it all to my desk. I will go figure this stuff out. And the corporate venture funds that are either 100% independent or 100% tied to the CEO or someone very senior in the organization are the only two corporate venture funds that kind of actually usually succeed. Anything else where there's hierarchy and you have to go up and down the chain of hierarchy or the chain of command, usually by the time the decision gets done, the startup, it's too late. Right? So you have to shortcut this time element. It's either crisis or it's someone very senior saying, you know what, no one has to stick their neck out. This is super important for the company, so I will take personal responsibility to actually do these engagements. Let's go make it happen and go bring me the stuff directly to me. I think that's the best way to kind of get past this time dimension. The startup, unfortunately, can't do very much. I wish the startup could change things to make themselves more attractive to the corporates, but they only have 12 months of life. There's only so much that they can do on their side. They got bigger issues. The responsibility is usually more on the corporate side. And all the startup does is if it realizes something's going to be too slow, it diverts its resources away from that and goes on to something else because it's got to go figure out how to survive.
That's absolutely fantastic. So basically, if I want to summarize what you said rapid decision making. So the corporations needs to learn to create a framework for rapid decision making when they're collaborating with startups and eliminate some of the progresses. But I've written this down: painkillers versus vitamins. That's very interesting. I'll need to think about it. But I'll ask my last question to Enis. Enis, the cultural differences we talk, and we know that there's an intrinsic dilemma about how both of these worlds can cooperate. So what are your key learnings and recommendations for us? What have you seen work? What didn't work?
First of all, I think how you start actually determines your destiny. So there has to be a firm commitment from the corporate. Otherwise, when things are going well, the corporate doesn't want to put allocations because resources there because things are going well in the main business. Anyways, when things are going bad, the corporate obviously doesn't want to put resources there because things are going bad. There are more fires that they have to stop. So firm commitment. There's a reason why venture capital funds are 7 years, 10 years, 15 years. It's because we shouldn't be affected by momentarily changes, positive or negative. It has to be much more stable. And there can be strong engagement on different levels. I mean, if you think about this more like a Swiss Army knife and going through the pyramid analogy, investing into a VC fund is the tip of the pyramid, is the minimum that a corporate can do. But then as the AUM increases, as you do more and more investments, you start building a dedicated team, which might start doing primary investments. As you go down the pyramid, you do late stage investments, early stage investments, and you go wide, you even do entrepreneurship. And there are great examples, especially in the Bay Area by these corporate startup engagement programs of Mitsubishi, Siemens, Yamaha. They all, I think, their culture of innovation changed because of their basis in the Bay Area. And this might be a local example, but yesterday I was at a panel with Yahya Ülker from Yıldız Ventures at Harvard Business Review's panel, and he was talking about how they spun out İstegelsin, which is a grocery delivery company, out of the holding to become its own entity in and of itself. And by that, even that spun out and how fast they do it, their agility, their short-term feedback loops kind of fed in to all of these different holding companies so that they also change the way that they do the business. And I guess a global example, which was again an investor in a 500 fund, BBVA, acquired the 500 startups portfolio company, Simple, back in the day, which was a fintech banking provider. Although it wasn't the best exit out there, I think just from a cultural perspective, it pushed BBVA to launch into new markets with a mobile-only beachhead strategy, which worked out pretty well around Europe for BBVA. So I think there are a lot of good examples out there, and what's important is to have a firm commitment and not start from the top and go down the pyramid as you do more and more with a dedicated team.
Thank you. I think this dedication, both mentally and on a resource-wise, is very critical, as you mentioned. Bengi also touched upon investing, being LP. Hussein also mentioned similar things. So I think if I am to frame that, it's commitment on both culturally and also on the resources, both in terms of money and a team commitment. So thank you very much. We are now towards the end of this, but I'll try to summarize what I've heard from you in terms of how to make innovation work in an open innovation setup, because I don't think that there's any question about whether it is the right thing or not, because it's for me undebatable anymore. It's where the answer is. We know it from so many different examples. But courage is required to make the mental change. We need to build an ecosystem outside of the company that can help us. This Bengi mentioned 500 ecosystem partners. That's huge. How to nurture that ecosystem, how to build that requires dedication, as we just said. Dedication both in terms of resources, but also in terms of the senior management ownership. We need to show success. We need to show success early and with small steps. We need to understand the difference of the two worlds. Because the startups and the corporates are living in two different worlds, and we need to also enable rapid decision makings. And these are my key takeaways from the session. But I also want to mention one thing. This is something that we've been trying to really get our head around over the last 1 year. We had a session during the pandemic in Clubhouse, and one of the startups that we had collaborated actually gave us a feedback saying how difficult it was to work with us, and simply because of the decisions you made, like to get a a POC commitment was so long. Whether we would pay for the POC or not would be a discussion that took them months. And they were like, we really wanted to collaborate, but by the time we were able to get there, it was too late for us. So we really took it to our heart, and we've been working on it, not just by Arçelik, but since we believe in this ecosystem, we've been working with companies like us, and soon we'll be launching a new platform called Here to Next. The whole purpose of that platform will be making corporations open, innovation friendly, so that they will be oiling their engines to work better and faster with the startups. So I encourage everyone to follow up on that. We'll be releasing some news together with our partners. There will be some coach group companies. There will be some big companies in the Turkish innovation ecosystem. But Enis, Bengi, Hussein, you are more than welcome to divert some of your portfolio companies as well to these ecosystems. So our job is to really create this ecosystem, not for Arçelik, because we believe that even if McKinsey has built their own ecosystem, but we are trying to build an ecosystem that is even bigger than Arçelik. So let's see how that works, and I hope that we'll be able to put some value into this ecosystem, starting from Turkey as well. Again, thank you very much for your thoughts and participation. Pınar, the floor is yours. Thank you.